Life Healthcare was previously known as Afrox Health and relisted on the JSE in June 2010.
Exactly. I think it's time to stop referring to it as Afrox Health, but I always like pointing that out. It came out of the Afrox group. Why? Because Afrox is in the business of selling gases, including oxygen, to hospitals. A couple of them didn't pay their bills, so they actually bought the hospitals. This was like, back, 15, 20 years ago. Separately listed, went off the market, privately equity held, then came back. It's done very nicely since relisting in 2010.
They've recently acquired stakes in hospital groups in India and Poland, so we've got another two interesting geographies to discuss. Market cap 44.2 billion rand, a PE of 23.8, dividend yield of 3.3.
Right, so you're right. Strong business here in this market because I think people are familiar now with the Life brand. They will have seen that around. It's got a similar distribution of good facilities around the country here, with a slight emphasis on psychiatric care and a couple of specialist operators in that market, in the KZN market. Internationally, though, they had nothing. But recently, a 25% stake in a hospital group in India, which is a market similar to South Africa, but just massive potential market. And then entering the Eastern European market, which again is somewhat similar to South Africa, privately held groups which were for sale. They got a sizable stake in Poland.
Interesting though, because those are not two geographies you would traditionally associate with an expanding hospital group, if you look at what Mediclinic and Netcare have done.
Exactly. So I suppose what happened with Medicare and Netcare is that they were bigger, they were started earlier, they had bigger balance sheets, they were beginning to sense that South Africa was sort of getting to be a mature market, so they took the plunge in the last decade and went and bought developed market assets, utilizing typically debt in those markets. In the case of Life, it's a more subtle entry process. The scale of the deals is smaller, and they've been able to fund them through their own resources. But I mean, India is the 1 point how many billion people? The healthcare services there are horrible, like they are here. Private healthcare is increasingly popular.
Similar performance on the share price, but we do have a slight downturn of late.
Yes.
Do we need to take cognizance of that?
Well, look, all of the groups have had a slight down care of late because they came into the year looking very good.
A slight down care.
Yes. And that's because the market has softened a little bit.
Analogies here.
Here in South Africa, the whole sense that the combination of higher fuel prices, we've talked about it before, and interest rate potential shifts and so on has gotten people a little bit anxious about discretionary spending. And the overall market's been a bit up and down. But
if we rank these stocks, so we take the Netcare, the Netcare, the Mediclinic, and the Life Healthcare, what is the differentiator for Life Healthcare?
Look,
just size.
It's a pure play emerging markets type theme. I think that is the slight difference. So you don't get the developed country exposure like you have with the other two. But that, for some people, makes it more attractive. Others, would worry. The one other point just to mention about Life Healthcare is that a couple of weeks ago they had a trading update which indicated that earnings were going to be lower than the prior period.
That could be why we're seeing the down or the pressure.
But
slightly.
They then pointed out in the commentary that it was because in the prior period they had some realization from a sale of an asset, but they didn't explain it especially well, in my view.
Is the market confused then?
I think the market's slightly confused. So it was at 46 Rand, it fell back to around 40, now it's gone back a little bit. I think there's just a little bit of an overhang.
And we know that investors do not like confusion at all.
The other thing about it is that it is under new management. Well, it's perhaps a slightly too strong way of putting it. The CEO, Mike Fleming, stepped down. He's been replaced by a guy called Andre Meyer, who was previously a medical aid CEO, so he's crossed the fence, so to speak, from the funder to the provider, and he's a very good, experienced operator, so I don't foresee any kind of difficulty there.
Hot or not on Life Healthcare?
I think it's a slightly more murky picture, but I'm definitely still hot on this one. I think it's pulled back, it's attractively priced in a fabulous industry and operating in some new countries with great prospects.
And there's nothing that you don't like in this sector.
Well, I think the underlying fundamentals of the sector are so good, it's hard for management teams to do badly in this environment.